Do I look like a Russian spy? Bang, bang, bang. What we should have done is kick Russia off the international banking system. I don't think Vladimir Putin is a killer. I think he's a serial killer. Holodomor was genocide, and what's happening now is genocide. And we've got to say to the Russians, they would tie people behind their backs, put the gas mask on the face is being paid for in Ukrainian blood, and that is a disgrace and a shame. Ukraine has to fight, because if it doesn't fight, there's no Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Julia Tymoshenko, and this is Ukraine Through the Eyes of Reporters, a series of interviews where we talk to foreign journalists about their experience of covering the war in Ukraine. If you find this video informative, please subscribe to our channel and share the story on your social media, as well as check out more stories at the Ukrainer website. And today our guest is John Sweeney, a British writer, reporter, formerly investigative journalist at BBC, covering Russian war against Ukraine. John, in your bio description on Patreon, you say, "What gets me out of the pub is when power and money say to ordinary people, you shut up." Could you tell us more about that and about your journalistic career in general?
Well, in very simple terms, I first called Vladimir Putin a war criminal 23 years ago when I went undercover to Chechnya. And I saw compelling evidence of the Russian army killing refugees, and that's a war crime. And I saw compelling evidence of them using fuel air bombs against civilians, and that's a war crime. And using torture on a massive scale, and that's a war crime too. I wrote the story for my then newspaper, The Observer, calling Vladimir Putin was a war criminal, and no one listened to me. So in a kind of bonkers way, Julia, this is kind of therapy for me. That's like, I know there's an awful bloody war, but at least I said, listen, I told you he's a war criminal, and no one listened. And for far too long, the West backed away from standing up to Vladimir Putin because we were greedy, because we were cowardly, because we were stupid. And what is beautiful about being, for example, in Kyiv for the Battle of Kyiv, and I never left, was a sense that Ukraine has to fight, because if it doesn't fight, there's no Ukraine. It's an existential fight for Ukraine. But also, this for me is simple. This is a war of good versus evil. Now, yes, is Ukraine perfect? No, of course not. Am I perfect? I'm not perfect. But it was a peaceful democracy in 2014, and then the Russians invaded, and then the Russians have invaded all over again, February 24th last year. This was a country, a democracy at peace, and then Russia comes in. And then when you see it, and I've just been on a trip down to the Bakhmut area and then down to Mykolaiv and Kherson, there's just part of me, Julia, goes, what the are they doing? Am I allowed to swear? I'm going to swear anyway.
It's okay.
Yeah. But what the are they doing? What do the Russian people think they're doing? What's going on inside Putin's head? I don't understand it, but I do understand the Ukrainians must fight. And Elon Musk, who is a fool, has written, I read it this morning on Twitter. He says, the diplomats want war while the warriors want peace. Are you having a laugh, Elon Musk? Now, you can see how muddy these trousers are. And I've got a spare pair of trousers, but somebody's nicked them. I can't find my spare pair of trousers. So at the moment, I'm stuck with these. And they're muddy because I hung out with the Ukrainian artillery, firing shells in the Battle of Bakhmut, and it was very noisy and very muddy. But I asked one of the artillery people who spoke English, why are you fighting? We're fighting because we have to. Huge bang, outgoing. We're fighting because they're terrorists. And really, Elon Musk, don't take it from me, go to the Battle of Bakhmut and talk to the Ukrainian soldiers. Talk to everybody here.
Of course you will.
It's the thing is, it's desperate, it's brutal, it's grisly, it's cruel. The war is horrible. But Ukraine's fight, Ukraine's spirit is a thing of beauty.
It's really beautiful words. And yeah, thank you. It's really pleasant for me as a Ukrainian to hear that perspective from somebody who's an outsider, but sort of spent so much time during the most horrific time of our history with us. I want to go back a little bit to what you said about just the West being foolish and not listening to people like you, not listening to Ukrainians who also, and other formerly occupied nations, formerly occupied by Russia, about the fact that Putin is just like any of them, just the next dictator, that he's dangerous, and that has been ignored. Then he invaded Chechnya, Georgia, then Ukraine in 2014. When it comes to governments, I mean, there's a lot of ties. I know that you've been also doing some work exposing those ties of different politicians to the Kremlin. But what surprises me, I guess, why journalists weren't as interested as you in your profession.
There was a kind of a mind thing, a group think, that Putin was too big, and the story was too complicated. But also there was the other thing was I went to Chechnya undercover twice in 2000, and I reported on the latter part of the Second Chechen War, and that was started by Vladimir Putin. His casus belli, his reason for the war, was because of a Chechen terrorist attack in Moscow, in the Moscow apartment bombs. And if you investigate it, it's very simple. The Moscow apartment bombs planted by Chechen terrorists were planted by the KGB FSB. Now you're nodding because you're Ukrainian. And so but I write about this in my book, Killer in the Kremlin. So the big killing starts the moment Vladimir Putin is Yeltsin's prime minister. And he starts essentially by blowing up Russia. And we knew that. We knew that because I wrote the story in my newspaper, The Observer. So as well as calling him a war criminal, I also put in the story about the Ryazan sugar, the bomb that didn't go off, and all the evidence. The series of bombs were a black operation by the KGB FSB. I love the detail of this. There was a bomb that went off in the southern city of Volgodonsk, and the pro-Putin speaker of the Russian Duma, their parliament, said there's a bomb that's gone off in Volgodonsk. He was right. But the bomb didn't go off when he announced it. It went off 3 days later. Now, I'm very boring, but I like facts and evidence, and I don't think people are psychic. I think that's all bullshit. So what's the explanation? How does the Speaker of the Duma, who is one of Putin's people, how does he know a bomb's going to go off in Volgodonsk? Because he knew inside information. And they got the date wrong, but the place on the money. So Putin's war crimes start there, and I think MI6 and the CIA knew all about it. One of the reasons I say this is because my friend Christopher Steele, who is the former MI6 officer who was the head of the Russia House, the Russia Department at MI6, British Intelligence, has told me so. He was the man, by the way, who wrote the report on Trump being sexually compromised by the Russian secret state. And Christopher and I believe, and lots of other people believe, that Putin's original sin was the blowing up of the Moscow apartment bombs. The reason why the West looked the other way was because of 9/11. So 9/11 happens, 2001, and then suddenly the West has a terrible fear of radical Islam, of Islamism, both in Afghanistan, which was the place where the attack on New York was planned, but also Muslims in our own countries in the West. I believe that this fear is real, but it was too paranoid and overblown. And our real danger isn't with Islamist terror cells, terror units, Islamist terrorists, but with nuclear armed terror, Vladimir Putin's regime. And so what happened was, for far too long, we were terrified about a danger, a real danger. I'm not dismissing the danger. I've been rocketed by the Taliban 9 times in Pakistan, so I'm fully aware of what it's like. But at the same time, the far greater danger to world peace and to Western security comes from Russia. And behind Russia, there's China. But the fundamental mistake the West made, was by over-fearing Islamism, radical Islam, and under-fearing Vladimir Putin's fascist Russia. But for heck's sake, there are three moments, like I'm British. So my great friend Jessica Berlin, who you should interview, she can do this very well. So whenever we meet, we have an argument, almost a fist fight about who's worse, Britain or Germany. But my argument would be Germany wanted Russian oil and gas on the cheap. But what Britain did was Britain created Londongrad, which is essentially the washing machine for dirty Russian money. So money comes out of Moscow, it's dirty, and it gets washed in Londongrad. And one of the things I want to do is to burn down Londongrad. There are three moments. By the way, this is just therapy. You're like a psychiatrist for me. It's just sort of sitting there agreeing with me. But there are three moments where we should have really said to Vladimir Putin, stop this, because he's behaving like a school bully. The first moment was the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, former KGB spy, but at that point a British citizen, with polonium-210. I did a panorama about it, and I wandered around Moscow and St. Petersburg saying, I have a question. Can you buy polonium-210 in a shop? The answer is no. The point of the question is, no, you can't buy it in a shop. It's made by the Russian state. And it's a very, very expensive poison. After Litvinenko was killed, Britain kicked out 4 Russian diplomats. That's pathetic.
That's nothing.
All that Putin has to do is press print on his diplomatic passport machine 4 times. Print, 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 print. 4 new passports. 4 Russian spies go and spy in the London embassy. He doesn't give a damn. The second moment is the shooting down of MH17. Now, yes, the invasion of Crimea was wrong and against international law, and the invasion of Donetsk and Lugansk against international law, and the first it's the ripping up of the post-1945 settlement, and we should have reacted more heavily against that. But when that plane was shot down, 298 people were killed, and there were 10 Britons on board that plane. And again, we let Putin get away with it. We let Putin get away with murder. I went to the crash site panorama. I interviewed 2 Ukrainians who had met a Russian officer with the Buk missile, traveling in a jeep behind. He spoke Russian with a Moscow accent. It was the Russian army Buk missile. It was a Russian missile that killed those people.
It took them almost 9 years to finish the investigation.
And the reason was because people didn't want to lose dirty Russian money in London, and the Germans, etc., didn't want to lose cheap Russian gas. But time and time again. Then the third thing is the Skripal poisonings, the Salisbury poisonings. They tried to kill Sergei Skripal, former GRU spy, his daughter. They survived, but they did kill a completely innocent British citizen, Dawn Sturgis. This time we kicked out 120 passports around the world, diplomats around the world. Again, all that Putin does is press play, press print on his machine. Print, 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 print. He doesn't care. We're losing real British lives, and he's printing new diplomatic passports. We're losing our blood of our people. He's playing with monopoly money. He doesn't care. It's a game to him. What we should have done is kick Russia off the international banking system.
Earlier.
And we didn't. And the price of our folly is being paid for in Ukrainian blood, and that is a disgrace and a shame.
Yeah, that's one way to summarize it, definitely. What was your first experience of coming into Ukraine?
I first came to Ukraine in 2011 when I made a radio documentary about the Holodomor. I went to the London School of Economics, which was founded by the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw. And one of my favourite places at LSE, London School of Economics, was the Shaw Library, where you beautiful library, and you sat in lovely comfy chairs and read books. I love that place. But George Bernard Shaw was an idiot who denied the Holodomor, and I became fascinated with the idea of a clever man. He wrote wonderful plays. He wrote The Pygmalion, which became the musical My Fair Lady, which I love, and I played in school as Colonel Higgins. I sang terribly. But why is this clever man talking such rubbish? Because the Holodomor was real. And I did a radio documentary about the Holodomor, and I can remember talking to a very elderly Ukrainian woman who remembered starving as a child. And when she saw African kids starving with distended bellies, she said, I felt so sorry for them because I can remember when I was like that too. And this story, Malcolm Muggeridge was a hero of mine. He was one of the three great Western journalists who told the truth. Walter Duranty of the New York Times lied. And it's a continuing disgrace that the New York Times holds that Pulitzer Prize. Put it in the bin, New York Times, because you are honoring a man who is effectively a man who helped lie about Stalin's crimes against humanity. Malcolm Muggeridge wrote that this was a crime so monstrous no one in the future will ever believe it happened. And that's why I made this radio documentary called Useful Idiots. And then that led me to write a thriller called The Useful Idiot. None of these books are in Ukrainian, sadly, but if a Ukrainian publisher wants to publish it, I'd love it. But The Useful Idiot looks at the story of Gareth Jones, which you know, who was a great Welsh hero. And I met his niece, who's dead now, but I met Gareth Jones's niece when she was still alive, and she's in my radio documentary. I'm divorced now, but we're still pals. I'm still pals with my second wife. But for some crazy reason, I don't like New Year's Eve. I think it's a bit. It's joy at a moment in time. I don't like it. And so we had a thing about going to crazy places. One New Year's Eve we went to Beirut. Another New Year's Eve, we went to Donetsk. The airport was beautiful. The city was beautiful. And then in 2014, I saw it happen. So I've got a sense of it. So, and then this is how I love Ukraine. It's so bonkers. I don't know if you know, you should look it up. You have a clip of it, but I did a panorama about the Church of Scientology. Julia, are you a member of the Church of Scientology? No. Correct answer. They say that I'm a bigot, an alcoholic, and I am psychotic. I'm sure that's true. But they are an evil space alien cult that preys on people and mentally kidnaps their victims, I say. We did a panorama at one point. They madden me so much I lose my temper, and it goes out on YouTube. The result was that 5 million people watched the program. Ha ha ha. Scientology says that psychiatry is evil. It's a dark nonsense. Psychiatry is simply a very human attempt to help treat mental illness, which is very difficult, but psychiatry is a good thing. Weirdly, because of my huge battle with Scientology, psychiatrists loved me. And in 2016, I was invited to Lviv by Semyon Gluzman, who is the president of the Ukrainian Psychiatric Association. By the way, I've got a T-shirt, I'm not wearing it today, with Ukrainian Psychiatric Association, which I love wearing on the tube in London. And Semyon is a great friend of mine. Now, I don't know if you know the story. Do you know the story of Semyon?
No.
Semyon was the first Soviet psychiatrist, he's Ukrainian, to challenge the Soviet abuse of psychiatry because they locked up General Grigorenko. And he was a great Soviet Ukrainian general who fought the Nazis. And because he said the Communist Party was corrupt, he was locked up in a psychiatric hospital and given heavy psychiatric drugs. There was nothing wrong with him. The Communist Party was mad. He was sane. And Semyon Gluzman wrote a report in 1971 saying this was wrong. And he spent 10 years in the KGB prison and the Gulag for this. By the way, he is an expert now on the KGB mindset, the mindset of people like Vladimir Putin. And the Ukrainian government, and I think the Americans, are very interested in what he says. But he's my friend through Scientology. So part of my book, Killer in the Kremlin, my book is one of the three people it's dedicated to is Semyon Gluzman. He said, remember when I asked him just before the big invasion, 20 seconds, something like this, what's with Putin meeting Macron, this long table.
Yeah.
And Semyon, who's a beautiful mind, says it's the distance between Vladimir Putin and his death.
Mm-hmm. Very metaphoric, but also quite literal.
So I know Ukraine, and I love it. Before the war happened, I didn't spend enough time here until February last year. I came out on Valentine's Day. I've had some bad Valentine's days in my life, I tell you, but this one was bloody awful. So sad, because you all felt what was going to happen. You could feel it. You know.
I think it's very interesting what you said about Walter Duranty, Gareth Jones, and just overall the cover-up of Holodomor. Because back in the day, like at that time, the source of information could be controlled so easily. That's why Stalin had no problem, and he really didn't have to try hard to do so the information doesn't get out. But today we also see the same, like Walter Duranty's of today. We have journalists who just, for us, it feels like live in the parallel reality where they justify Putin's crime, where they talk about the nonsense of like Western imperialism and like NATO fighting here almost. And lots of people believe them. And also lots of people believe just like disinformation in the age where information is more accessible than ever. Why do you think that happens?
I don't really understand it, and it makes me mad. By the way, Stalin didn't have it all his own way. George Orwell. He told the truth. And weirdly, Dima, my fixer, we were coming back from Kherson, a long drive, from Mykolaiv back to Kyiv, and he said, "Do you mind? I want to listen to this audio book." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Animal Farm." And so we listened to George Orwell's Animal Farm, but the stuff there about squealer and fake news. I mean, what's so weird about it is that George Orwell would not have heard of Tucker Carlson, but he is the squealer of the 21st century. He's squealing the Kremlin's dark nonsense to 100 million Americans. Tucker Carlson is the most popular American cable TV host in the United States. What he talks dark rubbish. I'm working on a film with Byline TV called Putin's World War III or Third World War. Do you want changing the title? But the essence of it is to challenge this stuff.
Do you think there's hope in challenging that the minds of those people who listen to that every day will change one day?
It's hard. So I've now got. It's hard, but you have to be an optimist. You have to believe it. But there are times when it's exhausting, when you like, for example, Russia has said it doesn't target civilians. Well, I was in Kyiv when they hit the TV tower. I never left Kyiv during the Battle of Kyiv. I stayed. And I saw the police arrive in the morning. I was one of the first reporters to get on the scene in the morning. And I saw the police remove the dead bodies of an old man, a mother, and her 5-year-old daughter, I think, take them to the morgue. So the idea that Russia doesn't kill civilians, I saw it with my own eyes. It's kind of maddening, but this is true. Very early on in the war, there was an Indian journalist who told me that Zelensky and Putin were just the same. And my English friends, one of whom is a former sergeant in the Royal Marines and a very big man, had to physically restrain me from hitting this idiot because I was so angry. Because I was seeing Ukrainians die in front of my eyes. Or like, what? This war is fake? Are you joking?
Some people believe that.
And I kind of, now it's okay being British. It's better being British, but there are people who follow me on Twitter who kind of goad me. And what I do is I'm rude to them, then I mute them, as a policy. And now, partly because I do my daily blogs on Twitter from my Twitter thing at John Sweeney Raw, ROAR. I mean shouting at Scientology. But I've now got 280,000 followers. And when I'm rude to one of these people, all my followers say, don't bother, they're only trolls. But I can't understand the mentality. Now, some of them will be people paid to do this nonsense in Moscow, official squealers. But there are some people who do it willingly, both on the far left and on the far right. And I just find it a kind of madness. And frankly, Julia, it sickens me.
I think it sickens all of us to experience that denial of our real experience as well that we see in social media.
It's a denial of reality.
It's a denial of reality,
yeah.
Exactly.
And that there's a kind of, what are you doing? What are you talking about?
Do you have a story that you've covered in Ukraine during all of this time that specifically stuck with you? That really touched you, impacted you, maybe horrified you?
I'll tell you two stories. A funny one and a dark one. One of which is why I love Ukraine. One of which is why I hate Vladimir Putin's Russia. Day 2 of the war, I got arrested as a Russian spy by a Ukrainian soldier. Do I look like a Russian spy? Bang, bang, bang. And no bang, bang, but, okay. And I kept on saying, look at my Twitter picture. Look at my Twitter picture. Well, I told you to stop filming. So this soldier, Vlad said, stop filming. And I went, yeah. Walked another 100 yards and carried on filming. I didn't know that there was a Ukrainian anti-aircraft position. And so he was worried I was filming that. Everybody was paranoid. I was an arrogant dickhead. He was a bit over the top, but I'm more to blame.
That's the second day of the war.
Second day of the war, day two. And they booked me in to go and see the Ukrainian intelligence, the SBU. The phone call is made, and they all talk about me, the Russian spy, and I hear it, Россия шпионка, yeah?
Российский шпион.
Yeah, and I go, because I did Russian at school, I go, I'm not a Russian spy, look me up. And then finally, they look me up, and they see that in 2014, I challenged Vladimir Putin in a mammoth museum in Siberia. Now, by the way, it's impossible to challenge Putin in Moscow because the security will stop you. But he was opening a mammoth museum in Siberia, and I look like a professor of mammothology. And so I go up to Putin with all these other professors, and I say, what about the killings in Ukraine? What about MH17? And Peskov's there, and he's furious. But Putin, all the Russian TV switch their lights on because they think the question has been arranged. And so Putin answers me. He talks rubbish, but nevertheless, I do. So my Twitter picture is of me challenging Putin, and Vlad looks at it and he said, You've challenged Putin? Yes. And then he looks some more on Google and sees that I've annoyed Donald Trump so much, Donald Trump walked out on me. He said, this is Donald Trump? And yes, I'm not a Russian spy. And Vlad looks at me and he says, I think you have an interesting story. I go to the SBU. It's a bit heavy, but they check me out. They let me go. And then Vlad and I become great friends. And for the paperback version of my book, half the money I sold from the paperback version of this book launch event I had in Kyiv, I gave to Vlad Demchenko and his unit. He's taken me to Bakhmut 5 times. I haven't met him this trip, but every now and then we meet, and when he's got a break, because he's in Special Forces in the Ukrainian Army now. But when we meet, if he's got time off, we eat and we drink. We toast to the day he arrested me for being a Russian spy.
That is a beautiful story.
It's very funny. And by the way, the other thing I've got to say, and I need to apologize to everybody in Ukraine about this, is when I met Putin, I was really hungover. I'd been to my niece's wedding, and I got off the plane. It's Yakutsk, it's where this mammoth museum is, 9 time zones east of London. It's further east than Beijing. And I'm desperately hungry, no food on the plane. And I say, I've got to have a kebab. I'm so hungry. And we stop, and I eat this kebab. And then I'm waiting for Putin. And then I hit Putin with my question. Putin answers. And then and I'm much taller than him. I'm going to stand up. So I'm like this, and he's there. And And Putin is,
quite short, yeah.
he's done, and then suddenly I've got this sense of this kebab is I'm gonna throw up. Sorry, I should get down again because I'm changing the picture angle. But I'm gonna throw up over Vladimir Putin. And part of me thinks, John, if you do throw up over Vladimir Putin, you'll never have to buy a beer in Kyiv ever again. But I managed to keep it down, and I didn't vomit over the president of Russia. And I regret it now, and I apologize.
Thank you. I regret not seeing that recorded live as well.
3 hours later, there was a second event Putin was doing with a Chinese deputy prime minister opening a pipeline thing somewhere in the same kind of place. And Putin and the Chinese official were on the stage. And it was about 200 yards away. It was a great big hall. And somebody came up to me, punched me in the stomach, completely silent, and walked off. I.e., we didn't like your question, Mr. Sweeney. No one said anything. And I was, by the time I'd recovered, he'd gone. But that's what it's like asking a question of the master of the Kremlin. The other day, I went to Kherson police station, and we interviewed there were two places. One was the new cells, and there was a lovely Ukrainian guy called Sasha, and he spoke about being tortured with the phone, which is where they wind up a hand-cranked military field phone. They take the phone off, and they put the clips on your ears, on your fingers and toes, and they shock you. Yeah. But you can't move because your hands are tied behind your back. And the poor fellow, Sasha, cried as taking us around, us and the Spanish TV crew. Then we went to a second place, these were Soviet-era cells underneath the main police station in Kherson. And it was really dark and damp. And in the basement, we found some elephants, the slon. Do you know what they are? The slon, the elephant, in Russian, is the nickname for the Soviet-era gas mask. A long green face, with big things, and then you have the corrugated trunk. The breathing tube looks like an elephant's trunk, and then it goes into a filter. Filter had been disconnected, the trunk was gone, but the gas masks were there. And I first came across this 23 years ago in Chechnya when I did a radio documentary for the BBC about the Russian army torturing Chechens. And what they did was they would tie people behind their backs, put the gas mask on the face, and then the particular refinement they did in Chechnya was they would squirt CS gas up the nozzle into the gas mask. So people would start drowning on their own tears. So when I saw these gas masks in Kherson, it triggered memory of that. And then I went looking, and at the moment I haven't been able to find any Kherson torture victims who've been tortured with that mask. But it is true that they've been using it in Ukraine, and there's a police detective in Izium who told my Fixedema that they've used the gas mask, the elephant, in Izium against Ukrainians before it was liberated. What matters here is not the individual methods, the elephant or the phone, but the pattern. And the pattern has been going for 23 years, my own knowledge.
Same tools that they use.
Massive use of torture on a massive scale. It's a pattern and it's a system. And it's part of Vladimir Putin's system of keeping control, keeping power through violence.
Do you think it's been discussed enough in Western media?
In
Western media, this sort?
Partly because it's dark. But when I saw this mask, I first saw this 23 years ago. It's a mask. You get tortured. There are variants of it. You just squeeze the tube, and then the victim can't breathe. After 2 minutes, they lose consciousness. You open it up, and then you do it on repeat. I think Scholz is getting better, but certainly it's true to say that people like President Macron of France and Chancellor Scholz of Germany, at the start of the big war, wanted Ukraine to do some kind of bad peace deal with Russia. And my problem with that is you're not dealing with a normal politician, you're dealing with a psychopath. I don't think Vladimir Putin is a killer. I think he's a serial killer. You cannot do a deal with someone like that. His use of torture is systemic. His use of crimes against humanity, bombing blocks of flats in Dnipro. We saw the block of flat in January. We can look at people's kitchen. You can look at people's kitchen attachments and their bathroom stuff as if it's some awful horror show. No, it's real.
The violence against women as well is very systemic.
And rape on a massive scale, and also castration, much rarer, but it does happen, of Ukrainian soldiers. So I want to say to some of the people in the West, would you like to be castrated? Is that, because that's what Vladimir Putin wants from the Ukrainians, right? He wants, I'm uncomfortable because of my age. I'm uncomfortable with using the word genocide because I was brought up when it specifically meant something like the mass murder of the Jews, but the meaning has become broader. But in terms of destroying what Ukraine and Ukrainian means in terms of culture and literature, all of that, you just go to Kherson police station and you see they've shot books about Ukraine written by Ukrainian patriots. They've shot them. So, how do you talk to people who do this stuff, who rape, who castrate, who kill children?
Very few people actually know that the term genocide, which was coined by Raphael Lemkin, who did a lot of history research on Holodomor and specifically what Soviets were doing in Ukraine.
So it was coined because of the Holodomor?
Not because, but it was one of the examples that he used as well. He has a book, I think, that says on genocide, and I've studied it in the university. And I was really surprised that he came to do research or studies in Lviv, Raphael Lemkin. And when the UN resolution on genocide was signed, I think the Soviets were not really happy of them being in any way mentioned or connected to that. So obviously, when you look at the definitions of genocide, anything like Holodomor can be kind of disputed because it's not that explicit.
It happened.
Yeah. So that's why there's still this debate whether Holodomor was genocide or not. Whereas clearly it was.
Yes. So Holodomor was genocide, and what's happening now is genocide. And we've got to say to the Russians, raise your game. You've got it. I did Russian at school. I don't speak it at all well, but there was a time in my life when I loved all things Russian. No more. I met, I mispronounce everybody's names, but Anna Politkovskaya. She was the Russian journalist who was first poisoned. She survived, then shot dead in 2006. And she warned in 2003 that Vladimir Putin, by destroying free media in Russia, was zombifying Russia. And she was right, and Putin has succeeded in zombifying Russia. I also knew Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Estemirova, Boris Nemtsov, Alexei Navalny. In order, poisoned, then shot, poisoned, now in jail. Now, I know many Ukrainians don't like Navalny because he said some idiotic things and never apologized, but he is the greatest enemy of Putin in Russia. I've met him twice, and he says this war is wrong and it should stop, and about that he's right, and about that I agree with Navalny.
Do you think there is actually hope that somebody can come after Putin who's not just, more successful in fighting corruption, which is what Navalny claims he is, but the same way imperialist and also xenophobic?
Yes, it ends when Russia leaves Ukraine. And I think the only way that happens is when the Ukrainian army defeats Russia. And then I'm hoping somebody gets rid of Putin. I put a $5 on Deripaska because he's such a gangster. He actually might have a go at Putin. But Putin's war has been a catastrophe for Russia. And what they don't understand is that Russia, when they lose this war, and they will lose this war, but Russia will stand in shame as Germany stood in shame after the horrors of the Nazi regime became obvious to everyone everywhere. But what they need to do is, like Willy Brandt, the West German leader, he went to the Warsaw Ghetto and he kneeled because he was genuinely sorry about what had happened, what his nation had done. And the Russians need to do that.
I think for us Ukrainians, it's really hard to imagine that because Russians have been committing repeatedly genocides after genocide and never self-reflected in the way that...
As a great friend of Ukraine, my anxiety would be that if you tell the West that we're locked into a perpetual war with Russia, people will go, crikey. And,
no, definitely it is.
And get afraid of that. And every now and then, so I'm an optimist, you can call me a fool. But when Russia loses a war, it can get better. So after it lost the Crimea War, they abandoned serfdom. After they lost the war against the Japanese, they created a parliament, the Duma. I'm hoping after they lose this war, they become a sweet liberal democracy, and somebody
very
nice takes over.
Optimistic of you to say.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, but call me a fool.
I think a lot of Ukrainians hoping for disintegration of Russia and liberation of currently occupied territories such as Chechnya and others, which is something very uncomfortable for the West because it's scary, but...
So that the Americans in particular are afraid of this. So the problem that the Americans have got in particular is a fear of Iraq 2.0. But if you get rid of Putin, you won't have a nice liberal Democrat. You won't even have Navalny, who's a Democrat with a troubled history, brave man though he is. You will have chaos and the possibility, for example, of an Islamist Chechnya getting hold of a nuclear weapon. And so the gossip in Washington, D.C. is that the Americans want a Ukrainian victory, but on November the 5th next year, November the 4th being the date of the American presidential election, they don't want the Ukrainians to win too quickly, because if they win too quickly, then Putin will fall and then there'll be chaos. That's the gossip.
So let's spill more Ukrainian blood.
Now, the counter-argument is that actually it looks bad if Russia does better. And I'm torn about it, but I was very excited when Joe Biden came to Kyiv. By the way, so when my book is like Killer in the Kremlin, it's got a picture of Vladimir Putin on it. And basically, it's like a Harry Potter letter. I can get through anything, any checkpoint. I've written this book. I get arrested. You get detained by mistake, or I haven't got the right paperwork for this particular oblast, whatever. And I'm used to it. It's kind of my hobby, being arrested. But then I show my book, and then it's fine, on you go. And then there's this massive security in the heart of Kyiv, and I want to go somewhere, and I take my book out, and the Ukrainian cop said, "No, go back." And then I thought, that's Biden, because nothing else would cause a Ukrainian policeman to say that to an author of a book like mine. And I said on Twitter, word is, it's Biden. And I called it an hour before the BBC. Ha ha ha.
You're the first one, yeah. Well, this has been incredibly interesting, and I feel like we can talk and even debate on different topics for few more hours or forever. Exactly. Either way, it's a pleasure to learn about your experience. But I also wanted to ask you, probably as a very experienced journalist, reporter, investigative journalist.
I think I'm the oldest one, or one of the oldest.
That are here currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ukraine, I mean, has been... Ukraine and Russian invasion of Ukraine has been a very hot topic, so-called. Now the media attention kind of like a little bit dies down, especially like with all the turmoil happening in the West and people just shifting focus, which is, I guess, normal, yet sad for us. But still lots of journalists come and go. This term parachute journalism, you know, when they just come here and do a quick story, go back to whatever country they're coming from. What do you recommend, or what kind of advice would you give to journalists who are coming to Ukraine for the first time now, specifically Western journalists? What should they do to prepare to cover? What kind of maybe do's and don'ts? It's a huge country. It's the biggest in Europe. I don't think Russia's in Europe anymore.
It's a huge country and it takes you time to do stuff. But time here is beautifully rewarded. It is a ravishingly beautiful country, full of incredibly funny people. I love the Ukrainian sense of humor, which is, as as a Brit, it's very, very British, or very, very English. It's very dark, but there's a wonderful sense of wit, and there are moments where there are moments of humor and courage and resilience, which are extraordinarily beautiful. In the worst of times, the best of people come out. And you see it again and again. You see it on Twitter, but you see it in real life as well, of people being brave and good and kind. Being in Ukraine, helping to tell the story of ordinary, extraordinary Ukrainians has been the great pride of the sunset of my journalistic career. And what a story of courage and heroism. That one of the things I love about Kyiv is, and listen, I'm old, but I'm not that old. But what I read about London in 1940 feels like Kyiv now. All everybody wants to do is drink beer and go dancing, but you have to fight the monster. And then when you read about these tremendous sort of drinking sessions in Soho as the bombs were falling, and there would be bars where people would play jazz, of course banned by the Nazis. People would play jazz in London under the bombs. And all people wanted to do was have fun and love life and live life. They had to fight the monster. And that's exactly what you're doing. All you want to do, and as my friend Vlad Demchenko says, Ukraine is like the Shire in Lord of the Rings. We're hobbits. All we want to do is go dancing and drink beer, but you have to fight the monster. So I would say to especially young journalists, it's certainly hanging out in Kyiv is much safer than you might imagine it to be. If you go to the war zone, you do need to go on a hostile environment course. The Frontline Club is running one at low or little cost in Kyiv right now. You do need to take a tourniquet. You do need to know how to use it, because sometimes it rains shells, sometimes it's a downpour of Russian artillery, but nevertheless, this is an extraordinary story, and come and tell it.
And for how long do you hope to cover it?
Until I die or Vladimir Putin dies. I hope he dies first. I'm the younger man.
Me too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing, and for having such a almost intimate relationship with Ukraine, and reporting on the courage of Ukrainians and on the crimes and horrific violence of Russians.
The other piece of advice to British, or anyway, any foreign journalist coming here, you need to, if you're British, you need to know two phrases: Putin who, which means Putin's a dickhead, and
Yes.
Certainly last year, God save the Queen. You can get through most Ukrainian checkpoints after curfew if you just go, hello, good evening, God save the Queen, Putin who, and they go, you're late, but go away. So that's the Sweeney tip for how to get through Ukrainian army checkpoints after curfew.
Well, that's great. I hope journalists use it, but don't abuse it, because curfew is there for a reason.
Yeah. Sorry,
get shot.
Sorry, that came out wrong. On a couple of occasions, I was outside when I shouldn't have been.
Respect the curfew.
It happened once or twice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We had a great conversation with John Sweeney. If you like this video, please subscribe to Ukrainer's channel and check out more stories on our website.